All right.
There it goes.
Okay. Okay, so to set the scene, last week, Jacob's family immigrated to Egypt. Pharaoh welcomed them with open arms. Joseph's children and Joseph, and that they had the big reunion with their relatives from Canaan. Pharaoh and Jacob had their solemn chat. Jacob adopted his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, pulling him to the same level as all his other sons, and gave his blessing to the younger of the two, Ephraim, and then he gave some land in Canaan to Joseph. So this is chapter 49 this week, where we're going to see Jacob assess his sons on his deathbed. Genesis 49 is sometimes titled Jacob blesses his sons, but Jacob only uses the word bless in reference to Joseph. His words revealed much about his sons and the future. First, they expose his son's flawed character. Second, his words encourage his descendants during their challenging times of suffering in Egypt because of the promises built into them, and the also helped in those uh, years when they were wandering in the wilderness. Third, these words assured each tribe of a future place in the promised land. And if you look at this map here, you can see they all have a place in the promised land. I'll refer back to this as we go through each of these tribes. And then fifth, they reveal details of the promised Messiah, Jesus. So as we go through this, he grouped, in addressing them, he grouped them by their age, but mostly, but we're going to group them, Wiersbe groups them by their mothers. So we're going to talk mainly about, we're going to go through all of Leah's sons, then Bilhah's over here, then Zilpah's, and then Rachel's. So we'll go through the 12 sons. Leah's got half of them, right here, and then the others had two each. So let's first look at the sons of Leah. And we'll start with Reuben. All right, so this is, let's just go through, starting at verse 1. Then Jacob called together all his sons and said, "Gather around me, and I will tell you what will happen to each of you in the days to come. Come and listen, you sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, the child of my vigorous youth. You are first in rank and first in power. But you are as unruly as a flood, and you will be first no longer. For you went to bed with my wife, you defiled my marriage couch." Okay. So Jacob, he spoke right at Reuben, looking him right in the eyes, his eldest son, and what he had to say wasn't complimentary. It was about an old sin he committed with Bilhah. And as a reminder, we go back to Genesis chapter 35, verse 22. It says, "While he was living there, Reuben had intercourse with Bilhah, his father's concubine." And Jacob soon heard about it. Okay, so if we look back at the chart of here, we see that here's Bilhah. She's one of Jacob's wives or concubines, depending on how you look at it. And here's Reuben down here. So just kind of a horrible thing he did. And you can understand why Jacob would be upset about it. And then Jacob gave, that it caused Reuben to lose his privilege as firstborn child, as firstborn son, rather. And instead, we'll see that Jacob gave that blessing to Joseph and his sons instead. Well, as Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, he should have been a strong leader, but he turned out to be a weak man and made pretty much throughout poor decisions. In fact, it's difficult to find in Scripture any member of the tribe of Reuben who distinguished himself as a leader. What do we have? We have the Dathan and Abiram were Reubenites who gave leadership to the infamous rebellion of Korah. So if we go to, some of the Psalms you see by the sons of Korah. Well, he was one of Aaron's sons, but or Levi's sons, but he started a rebellion. One day, Korah, the son of Izhar, a descendant of Kohath, the son of Levi, conspired with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, from the tribe of Reuben. Now, that's one reference we have to Reuben. It was part of a rebellion. They tried to overthrow Moses and Aaron so that they could take over and take everybody back to Egypt, I believe. Well, that upset God so much that thousands of people died as a result. So another thing the tribe of Reuben did was to ignore the call of Deborah and Barak when they fought the Canaanites. And we'll see that in Judges Judges chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. We see that, let's skip down to the last half. But in the tribe of Reuben, there was great indecision. Why did you sit at home among the sheepfolds to hear the shepherds whistle for their flocks? Yes, in the tribe of Reuben, there was great indecision. They did not come to help Deborah and Barak. One thing we can say about them is they did possibly, may have sent soldiers to assist David at Hebron, if we look at 1 Chronicles 12:37, way up later, much later, this time of David. We have from the east side of the Jordan, where the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh lived, there were 120,000 troops armed with every kind of weapon. This is when everybody came together to get behind David. And so they may have been part of that, that gathering, though, since it doesn't say which tribes. It says there were among them, every 120,000. So maybe some came from Reuben. That takes us to the next one, which is Simeon and Levi. Actually, we'll put those two together because Reuben's sin was lust, but Simeon's and Levi's were guilt. They were, excuse me, they were guilty of violence and anger when they massacred the Shechemites. So let's read these verses here. Simeon and Levi are two of a kind. Their weapons are instruments of violence. May I never join in their meetings. May I never be a party to their plans. For in their anger, they murdered men and they crippled oxen just for sport. A curse on their anger, for it is fierce. A curse on their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them among the descendants of Jacob. I will disperse them throughout Israel. Well, that proved to be very true because Reuben's, Simeon and Levi were just themselves very angry and violent people. they massacred. Let's go back and just very quickly, the Shechemites. This is the Shechemites. One of the Shechemites, whose name was Shechem, had violated their Simeon and Levi's sister Dinah, and so they wanted to get revenge. And did they convinced these guys to get circumcised. Then they went in and took their swords and entered the town without such opposition. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. Then they killed them with their swords. Then they took Dinah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. And then they found the rest of Jacob's sons arrived and found the men slaughtered. So yeah, they first off, it's very violent and angry thing to go and avenge your sister's rape, but it certainly was beyond the pale, beyond the scope to wipe out all these innocent people in the whole town. They didn't do it. It was just this one fellow from there. Well, eventually, as Jacob predicted, these tribes were scattered and sort of dispersed and played very little role later in the tribes of Israel, because the tribe of Simeon was eventually absorbed into the tribe of Judah. So let's go back to the map, and let me go ahead and grow that. And you see there, here's Simeon in purple. I don't know if you can read the word, but at least the color. In this field of green, well, this green is the tribal home of Judah, and Simeon was allocated a spot, its tribal home, right in the middle of Judah. And over time, it just sort of became part of Judah. You don't really hear of Simeon by itself very much. And then as for Levi, well, they became the Levites, and they were scattered as they didn't ever have a tribal home on purpose. That was God's plan. So, because they were to be the 10th, tithe for the people. So just to summarize that, excuse me, when they avenged, they were eventually absorbed. Okay, Simeon was absorbed into Judah, and then the tribe of Levi was given 48 towns to live in, but they were scattered throughout the land, just as Jacob had predicted. Let's move now on to Judah, who is the next verses, 8 through 12. Let me fix that. Move on down to Judah again. Judah, you and your brothers will praise you. Your brothers will praise you. You will grasp your enemies by the neck. All your relatives will bow before you. Judah, my son, is a young lion who has finished eating his prey. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor will the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one to whom all nations will honor. He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. So a lot of good things to say about Judah. So up to this point, Jacob's been just exposing the sins of Reuben and Simeon and Levi, but he didn't do that for Judah, despite the fact that Judah did sin against Joseph and Tamar. So for Joseph, he's the one who suggested that they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, for goodness sake. And then for Tamar, there's a whole chapter about right in the middle of the description of Joseph, in which Judah and Tamar have this encounter, and Judah refuses to give Tamar one of his sons because every son he's been giving her as a husband has been dying. And so he said, well, I'm not going to give you this next one. And she dresses up as a harlot, and they end up having a child together. And then he realizes his sin. And from that point on, once he realized that she was more righteous than he was, he turned around. And in fact, his esteem in Jacob's eyes had risen dramatically from that point on. And as he began to grow in maturity, and it gives us all hope that despite how low we fall, we can come back, because he rose to such high esteem in Jacob's eyes that when the clan moved to Egypt, when they were immigrating to Egypt, it was Judah whom Jacob sent ahead to make things ready. Judah had made some mistakes, but he had made things right with his father and his family. That was the difference between him and his elder brothers. So the name Judah, moving on, the name Judah and the Hebrew word for praise are very similar. And Judah lived up to his name. He founded the royal tribe that gave Israel their kings, ultimately bringing Jesus Christ into the world. And Jacob compared Judah to a lion, the king of beasts. The ancient Shiloh is mentioned in there, and the ancient rabbinical scholars took Shiloh in verse 10. Let me scroll down to there. I guess in this translation it's not there, but in the King James it is. And see if it's in some of these. Anyway, they think that is another name for the promised Messiah, who alone had the right to claim the rule over God's people, Israel. So another indicator that we're getting messianic here in these next verses. Certainly the descriptions in verses 11 through 12 are prophecies of the kingdom age when the Messiah reigns over Israel. Nobody in Old Testament times would do something like use a choice vine for a hitching post, because it's still soft, and the donkey, because it could ruin the vine, the donkey tugging on it, and the animal could escape by just breaking the vine. So that's not something you do, nor would someone waste wine by washing clothes in it. So this was the language of hyperbole. It describes a land so wealthy and a people so prosperous that they can do these things and not worry about the consequences. And we have this promise that during the kingdom age, when the Messiah reigns, second coming, people will enjoy health and beauty because the devastating enemies of human life will be gone. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth are whiter than milk. So just the picture of health. So that's Judah. Moving on to Zebulun. That's in verse 13. Zebulun will settle by the seashore and will be a harbor for ships. His borders will extend to Sidon. Well, while not directly on the Mediterranean coast, the tribe was close enough to make a very profitable business out of transporting goods from ships into the interior. The Phoenicians really owned the coast, Sidon and that area, but they provided imported goods to the people to the east. So on the map, you can clearly see that. We blow this up. You see that here's Zebulun, and here's, or I'm sorry, I think we're on Asher. So here's this land here, and we're on Zebulun, sorry. It's close to the coast, and you see this land, this very land always known as a coastal, as a shipping area, and they were able to, they were close to it. So Zebulun. They were also a brave tribe whose warriors had an excellent reputation. We see, for example, 1 Chronicles 12:33, looking ahead. They says from the tribe of Zebulun, there were 50,000 skilled warriors. They were fully armed, prepared for battle, and completely loyal to David. So they had this profitable business with the Phoenicians to the west. And another good thing they did was that they got the praise from Deborah and Barak for rallying to the cause to fight Sisera in Judges 5. So this is when Deborah was the judge, and she called Barak to go fight Sisera. From Zebulun came down those who carried a commander's staff. And so the princes of Issachar and Deborah were with Deborah and Barak, like I showed before. So the people from Zebulun were also there. And Elon, okay, Elon, familiar name today. One of the judges was from this tribe. So there's actually a judge from this tribe. We see in Genesis 12:1 that, that's what we were just reading. Okay, moving on then to the next, we have Issachar. Issachar is as sturdy as a donkey, resting between two saddle packs. When he sees how good the countryside is and how pleasant the land, he will bend his shoulder to the load and submit himself to hard labor. So I try to represent that with a donkey and a laborer there working in the sun. So it was located at the eastern end of this very fertile Jezreel Valley. It was sandwiched between Zebulun and the Jordan River. The judge Tola was from Issachar. The men of Issachar fought against Sisera Okay, we just read. And David had soldiers from that tribe who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. These are some of the few verses in the whole Bible for each of these tribes, by the way, that we have. So Weirdsby has pulled them all together so we can try to build an image of each of these tribes. From the tribe of Issachar, there were 200 leaders of the tribe with their relatives. All these men understood the signs of the time and knew the best course for Israel to take. So they were known for their excellent decision making. And we know that the men of this tribe were courageous in battle. In 1 Chronicles 7:5, total number of mighty warriors from all the clans of the tribe of Issachar was 87,000. And all of them were listed in their genealogical records. So the mighty warriors. So Old Testament times, kings rode on donkeys. And that's what he called them. So Jacob gave this son kind of the image of a strong people who weren't afraid to carry important burdens. The people of Issachar were hardworking farmers, content with their lot. They produced no great heroes. They had some brave warriors, but their everyday labor was a help to others. And a message we can take from that is that God needs everyday people, just normal people. Not everybody's called to be a Judah or a Joseph or a Billy Graham or a Warren Wiersbe or whomever. Some of us just need to be everyday people. Well, to take just a summary so far of Leah's 6 sons, as we finish up the sons of Leah, the first 3 lost God's blessing because of their sins. And they're to remind us that purity and self-control are essential to godly character. And then we have Zebulun and Issachar, who were just everyday people whose tribes humbly served each other people. And then we have the one son, Judah, who was preeminent among those brothers. And his descendants were the royal tribe that conquered enemies and produced kings, including Jesus. Let's move on to the next group, these sons of Bilhah. We have 2. And we have Rachel. Well, anyway, as an introduction, Rachel gave Jacob Bilhah, just to remind us, her maid, to bear her children because for a long time she was childless. And the first one that Bilhah bore was Dan. So we look at verses 16 on, we see Dan will govern his people like any other tribe in Israel. Dan will be a snake beside the road, a poisonous viper along the path that bites the horse's hooves so that its rider is thrown off. I trust in you for salvation, O Lord. So Dan, the name, means to judge. And his tribe produced one of the most famous judges, the unsavory, we'll call him Samson, who was a judge, but he was quite a character too, right? The tribe of Dan was given this fertile land bordering the Mediterranean Sea, but they couldn't drive out the Philistines, so they moved north, wiped out the people of Laish, and took their land. So like snakes, they didn't stay where they were and went off and took over somebody else's land. We see that in this map. That's why I picked this one, even though the names aren't quite as easy to read. You see this kind of orange area right here. That was the original territory of Dan. Eventually, well, most of it remained Philistine. What you don't see in this map is that from about here on to the coast, they never got that land. That always remained in the land of the Philistines or the Canaanites. It was never taken over. So Dan couldn't get, were given this beautiful land here along the coast and up into the hills. They couldn't conquer the people there. So they gave up and marched all the way up here to the far north and took over this area of was originally Laish. So they got this little bit of land here and moved there. So for most of the history, Dan was up north. In fact, when sometimes in reference to the entire country in the Old Testament, you hear from Dan to Beersheba, because Dan is the most northernmost part of the kingdom, and Beersheba is way down in the south, as we saw last week. So that's Dan, a serpent. By associating Dan with a serpent, Jacob revealed, his crafty nature and his desire to attack suddenly, as they did with Laish. And then 2 centuries later, King Jeroboam set up a golden calf in Dan. Another thing that's not so complimentary about it. Dan is actually left out of the genealogies at the beginning of First Chronicles and in the tribal listings in Revelation. However, when Ezekiel is describing the placing of the tribes during the kingdom age and his prophesying of the future, he had a place for Dan. So I'm not sure what its final state is. Anyway, then we have this out of the blue exclamation, "I trust in you for salvation, O Lord." Well, that's suggesting that Jacob was in communion with God while he was speaking to his sons. Let's move on to Naphtali. Naphtali is Genesis 21. And Naphtali, he says, is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. So Naphtali's tribal location was north of Zebulun and Issachar and contained the Sea of Galilee. Zebulun and Naphtali were part of this district called Galilee of the Gentiles, which was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, and where Jesus ministered. So they've got the distinction of being where Jesus ministered. And Zebulun and Naphtali were just always distinguished by their bravery in battle. The image of a doe suggests a free-spirited people not bound to tradition. Moses said they were rich in favor and full of the Lord's blessing. Because Moses also gave pronouncements on the tribes before he died in Deuteronomy. Possessing the ability to run like does, the people of Naphtali would make ideal messengers. So those are Dan and Naphtali. In summary, the descendants of Bilhah's 2 sons were contrasting peoples. Dan turned away from faith into true God, trusted in idols, and exploited others. But Jacob does not condemn Naphtali. Sadly, though, when the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom, Naphtali was the first tribe to be deported when the northern kingdom was deposed of. If we move on to Zilpah, we have Gad and Asher. Gad is in 49 verses 19. So now we're jumped back and look at it. Gad will be attacked by marauding bands, but he will attack them when they retreat. Well, Gad's got two meanings, this word. It can mean both good fortune and a troop. Well, because of the tribe's location on the east side of the Jordan, it was vulnerable to marauding bands. Let's go take a quick look at where Gad is. Gad's over here, right between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee on the eastern side of the Jordan River. So they were very vulnerable over there. There was nobody protecting them on their eastern flank, so they were getting attacked. But Jacob assured these Gadites they would conquer their enemies in the end. This verse literally reads troop, in other words, Gad, a troop within a will troop on him, and he will troop on their heels. A troop will troop on him, and he will troop on their heels. That's the way it came off in the ancient language. So Jacob, even though he was about to die, could still, turn a phrase. The Gadites were great warriors. We know that about them in Joshua 22. And Moses compared them to a brave lion that could tear off the arms and heads of his enemies when Moses was giving his pronouncements on Gad. We don't see much more about Gad in the Bible, but we have those verses. If we move on to Asher, verse 29, Asher will dine on rich foods and produce food fit for kings. All right, he's our little chef there. And the name means blessed or happy. Since the tribe of Asher wasn't able to drive out the inhabitants of their territory either, instead of doing what Dan did, they just settled down alongside them to be an agricultural people. They took advantage of this fertile land that God gave them. Moses said that Asher was the most blessed, referring to its wealth of olive oil and the security of its cities. So they were, farm people and had this security. And then we have the sons of Rachel. We have Joseph and Benjamin, and that's the end of them. That's the last of the sons here. So Rachel, of course, was Jacob's favorite wife, and her two sons were his favorite children. And Jacob said more about Joseph than any of the other sons. But he didn't have much to say about Benjamin. So we'll look at that. Let's look at Genesis 49, 22 through 26. So a lot of verses devoted to Joseph. Joseph is the foal of a wild donkey, the foal of a wild donkey at spring, one of the wild donkeys on the ridge. Get the idea, it's a wild donkey. Archers attacked him savagely. They shot at him and harassed him, but his bow remained taut and his arms were strengthened by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the shepherd, the rock of Israel. May the God of your father help you. May the Almighty bless you with the blessings of the heavens above and blessings of the watery depths below and blessings of the beast of the womb. And may my fatherly blessings on you surpass the blessings of my ancestors, reaching to the heights of the eternal hills. May these blessings rest on the head of Joseph, who is a prince among brothers. You get two ideas. You get the idea of a dough and blessings from these verses. Let's digest them now. Jacob used the image of archers to describe the suffering that Joseph experienced from his brothers and his master in Egypt. In Scripture, the shooting of arrows is often the image of telling lies. And we know that's what happened with Joseph. Joseph's brothers lied about him to their father. Potiphar's wife lied about him to Potiphar. But Joseph didn't shoot back because God had enabled him to prophesy truths, not lies. And this ability to prophesy truths led to his elevation to be, of course, second to the ruler of Egypt. Well, and then in the context of bows and arrows, Jacob prophesies about the pride of the men of Ephraim had for their military skills. And indeed, they were very good at that. Well, in this passage, Jacob uses three more special names of the Lord. The mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, and the rock. God, the mighty one, had cared for Jacob's needs, helping him with his demanding work and delivering him from danger. Jacob had earlier referred to the Lord as the God who shepherded me and looked after me. Jacob was a shepherd. So Jacob had been a shepherd, and so he knew what was involved in caring for sheep. So he knew what it was like to have that responsibility. And the concept of God as a shepherd is found all over the scripture. Go no further than the 23rd Psalm, verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd, shall not want. And it culminates in the idea of Jesus, the good shepherd. The rock, solid, is another familiar image of God, and also points to Christ all over the place in the scripture. Christ is that cornerstone. He's the rock. And God was a rock to Jacob. In verse 25, Jacob promises to Joseph that God would send his descendants the blessings or rains from heaven above and the springs from earth beneath. He also promised fertility to the people. And Ephraim and Manasseh both became large, important tribes in the northern kingdom. And, it was frequently referred to the northern kingdom as just simply as Ephraim because that tribe was so dominant. We look at back one more time at this map, we see that Manasseh, look at this, how huge Manasseh is, and it extends into, it should be showing the half tribe of Manasseh on this side and then the other side. And then, there's the other half of Manasseh, just some huge area. And then Ephraim has a large area as well and became pretty much the dominant tribe for this whole northern region that split off. You see this dark dotted line is the split point between the southern and the northern kingdoms. And Ephraim was the always considered the head of that. Regarding verse 26, from Abraham to Jacob, the family's wealth had increased because of the blessings of the Lord. It filled up the land to the very mountaintops. And now Joseph, the substitute firstborn, and his two sons would share that inheritance. So Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Now we see a lot about Ephraim in the Bible, and a lot about Benjamin and about Judah, but not too much about the rest of them. Well, Benjamin is this last verse here, 27. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, devouring his enemies in the morning and dividing his plunder in the evening. Jacob's words to his younger son Benjamin were few and uncomplimentary, really, about the devouring wolf. Although the men of Benjamin were brave and helped defeat Sisera, when you read about Benjamin's tribal history in Judges 19 and 20, you see that ravenous wolf in action. Because that's where King Saul was at his worst. And King Saul was a Benjamite, and he spent much of his reign chasing down David, for one thing, for no good reason other than he was afraid of him and jealous. And then he ruthlessly murdered everybody in the priestly city of Nob. Let's go to 1 Samuel 22, verse 18. The context is Saul found out that the priest there had given David some bread, because this priest didn't know that David was now a renegade. He'd just gone renegade from Saul. So then the king, Saul, said to Doge, "You do it." So Doge the Edomite turned on them, those are the priests, and killed them that day, 85 priests in all, still wearing the priestly garments. Saul couldn't get anybody else to do it, so he turned on this fellow Doge to do it. Really disgusting thing that he did. Well, there's Saul, this ravenous wolf. Other ravenous Benjamites were Abner. Now he was he worked with David, but he was pretty mean too. But Asahel refused to turn back. So the context here is Asahel is running after Abner. So Abner thrust the butt end of his spear through Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He stumbled to the ground, died there, and everyone who came by that spot stooped and stood still. So that's Abner. Sheba was very deceptive, deceived David a lot. Shimei was the one who would threw rocks at David when he was escaping from his son. And then we have Saul of Tarsus, who was also a Benjamite, and he turned out good, but he started out really, really mean, and was like a ravenous wolf going after the Christians to imprison them. Well, in contrast, Moses called, as a contrast, we have to admit, Moses, in his assessment of Benjamin, called him the beloved of the Lord and promised him constant protection from God. Well, when the nation divided after Solomon's death, we have to say that the tribe of Benjamin remained faithful to the Davidic line and stayed with Judah. They didn't go with the northern kingdom up above. They stayed below. That dividing line had Benjamin down below it. So together with this absorbed Simeon tribe, they formed the southern kingdom of Judah. So that's a good thing they did. If we look at this last bit about all the sons together, these last verses of this first chapter 49, verses 28 through 38, I'll read those very quickly. So these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said he told his sons goodbye. As he told his sons goodbye, he blessed each one of them with an appropriate message. It's the summary of it. Then Jacob instructed them, soon I will die and join my ancestors. Bury me with my father and my grandfather in the cave of the field of Ephron the Hittite. This is the cave in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre in Canaan, that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite as a permanent burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried. And there I buried Leah. It is a plot of land and the cave that my grandfather Abraham bought from the Hittites. When Jacob had finished this charge to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed. He drew his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and joined his ancestors in death. So Jacob's last statements were about himself. So Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah were all buried in this cave of Machpelah. So naturally, Jacob wanted to join them. He'd already spoken about this to Joseph, we saw last week, but he wanted all his sons to know that they shared in this responsibility. Jacob's long, difficult life was over. He'd made his last journey, given his last blessing, and he shared his last request. His work was done. And as he breathed his last and died, with only his staff, he had crossed over the Jordan many years before, and now he had his staff with him as he crossed to the other side. He was a pilgrim to the very end. How do we know he had his staff with him? It tells us so in Hebrews 11:21, where it says, it was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. As a summary, in this lesson, Jacob's words were told much about his sons. First, they revealed his son's character. Second, his words encouraged his descendants during their what would be challenging times that they suffered in Egypt, and then the wilderness wanderings. And then third, they assured each tribe of a place in the promised land, which we saw on the map. Fourth, they were a beautiful revelation of the gracious Lord who cared for him for many years. And fifth, they revealed details of the promised Messiah, some of the earliest messianic writing we have in the Bible. Next week, we're going to study chapter 11 of Wiersbe's Be Authentic, and it will be the last chapter of the book of Genesis, in which Joseph led his brothers to bury Jacob at Machpelah as he asked, and then has to reassure them that he did. Yes, I have forgiven you. And then he prophesied that the Lord would lead their descendants out of Egypt into Canaan. And then finally, it is Joseph's death that closes out the book of Genesis, which is how we'll end next week. And then the week after, we've got one final look at the whole book of Genesis that Wiersbe gives us. Any comments or questions today? Covered a lot of ground. Even though it's just one chapter, it talks about all these tribes, and you don't get that too much. A lot of people have questions about, well, who are these tribes? Where did they come from? What did each one do? This chapter was an attempt to answer some of those questions. Anybody have any comments? Anything strike you as new or interesting? Okay. Well, either that means I nobody understood what I said, or I did a good job of explaining it.
Did a good job.
Yes, you did a good job.
Okay. Uh, all right. Well, I'll go ahead and stop the sharing as usual. And then go ahead and turn off the recording.